4 years, guys, the world's leading volcanologists, they're meeting for a symposium to discuss volcanoes and their threat. And it seems, especially Europe, but the whole world, is getting more and more concerned about Campi Flegrei, the supervolcano in Italy. So just a few days ago, at the beginning of July, this meeting of the International Association of Volcanology and Chemistry of the Earth's interior, I said it, or IAVCEI, that's the shortcut, took place in Switzerland for the first time ever. And one topic that was particularly discussed and very intensively in Geneva was the new developments, all the new studies, and the recent crisis at the Phlegreian fields near Naples, Campi Flegrei. And there was consensus on one point. It is not advisable to simply hope that this very dangerous supervolcano will calm down on its own, because it doesn't look like this. Basically, what they all agree on is that the crust of Campi Flegrei is cracking. I've reported about all these studies, one after the other, that tells us here's the weak point, this is what's happening, shallow magma chamber discovered, caprock layer is so weak, there is the Achilles heel, there is an even weaker point where magma can come through. So all that, I have a Campi Flegrei playlist, you should really watch this, and you should watch what the president of the INGV just said a few days ago. Before, they were always like, it's all normal, don't worry, don't panic. Their own scientists were jumping left and right saying, I'm not speaking for the INGV, but you should evacuate. But now the president has said something, a dire warning, and they all say the eruption will happen. Check out these videos in the end screen, but let's get back to this convention here. We know there's unrest underneath Campi Flegrei and new findings on a possible eruption of this volcanic field. Campi Flegrei, the burning fields, if you translate this, they have been presented in Geneva. And it's clear. Scientists say we should not wait and hope. But what can you do? You can't stop a supervolcano from erupting. Move the people away. Scientists have been saying that at least for 6 to 7 years. The earthquakes keep getting larger. We just had the largest ever recorded since the last eruption when Monte Nuovo was created, a magnitude 4.6. So the increasing activity at the Campi Flegrei, they all say, is worrying international experts, not only the ones that sit on the volcano, the INGV Vesuvius Observatory, that monitor it very, very densely every day. There's a huge magma chamber underneath. And since 2023 at least, these earthquakes, we've seen like 4.4, 4.3, 4.4, 4.6, 4. They're getting larger. For a volcano, this is very large, guys. Don't mix this with tectonic earthquakes like 6, 7, or even higher. Gas eruptions intensified the emissions. The ground deformations have accelerated the land rise of this Brady seism, steadily intensifying. The caprock layer, what keeps the lid on this pressure cooker, is getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and it's cracking. And that could trigger an eruption. So the world's leading volcanologists are meeting every 4 years for this symposium. And there has been a shift in the assessment of the time frame for an eruption of Campi Flegrei. Just some time ago, despite dire warnings of scientists that are local there watching this, the terms still sounded like super long time. Terms like decades or short term were not mentioned. But now, they are increasingly appearing in multiple studies. It's not just one guy, multiple studies, and analysis. And now we're hearing terms like could happen in decades or short term. And I've reported about this. We could see a phreatic eruption at any time. A phreatic explosion, which would not be like a supervolcanic eruption, but bad enough for the people that live in the red zone. But when Monte Nuovo was created, it started with a phreatic eruption that basically blew the pipe like a miner, built the tunnel for a later magma eruption to follow. So now when they're saying, oh, it'll just be a phreatic eruption, just let's evacuate a few people in the red zone. Yeah, good. Finally, they understand that. But there's still a bigger threat. Of course, they're saying, although we still can't predict exactly when an eruption will occur, we are constantly gaining new insights. If you're following this channel, I'm reporting about every new insight that is coming out. So please subscribe, guys. If you want to support the channel, click the links in the description. Buy me a coffee, for example. But let's get to this, because what I just quoted was a professor of volcanology and petrology at the University of Geneva. I think it is very valuable to hear from other people, not only from the INGV. What is the red zone? This is, some say, 500,000 people, 700,000 people, 80,000 people in Pozzuoli, where we see most of the epicenters of these earthquakes around the Peschiarelli-Solfatara area, this desert-like crater that has all these fumaroles and the gas emissions. And by the way, the volcano just burned through a road, again, melting the asphalt. Put the video in the end screen. Crazy, because they all live on the volcano and they built this road through the volcano. So scientists here say over 2 million people at least would be affected. If it was a larger eruption, over 6 million people, greater Naples area, would be affected. Because Campi Flegrei, and that's what they try to make clear to everyone who attended, is not just a volcano. It's a volcanic field with different craters, a caldera. And since they were in Switzerland, they say it has roughly the size of the canton of Zug. Canton is like a province within Switzerland, an area. And around 500,000 people live within the greatest danger zone. But again, an eruption would affect an area with over 6 million people. If they started to evacuate, it would be complete chaos, because roads are narrow, buildings are old, will collapse, because an eruption will come with earthquakes as precursors. That will do a lot of damage. They just found out when Vesuvius erupted and destroyed Pompeii, many people were ended by the earthquakes that came before the eruption because their buildings collapsed on them. And there's so many old buildings in Naples, it's going to be devastating. The volcanic potential that lies beneath Campi Flegrei is enormous, guys. And about 39,000 something years ago, a massive eruption happened at Campi Flegrei. This was a highly explosive eruption that has destroyed large parts of southern Italy and has released several hundred cubic kilometers of pulverized magma into the atmosphere. So this eruption did have an impact on global climate, and therefore the Campi Flegrei are considered a volcano capable of so-called super eruptions. And the problem that we have right now, the activity is constantly increasing since 2005. Everything is increasing. But the last 2 years, guys, if you've been following me, I think they were something else, a different level, really accelerated. And it's clear the reason for this activity, for this crisis in the Gulf of Pozzuoli and on land and in water, this is where this caldera stretches, is the rise of magma. Magma is rising up, molten rock beneath the Earth's crust. And the researchers believe that a huge magma chamber that is deeper down, we've also got a shallow magma chamber confirmed at a depth of only 3 point something kilometers, which is concerning. But the big one could contain 900 cubic kilometers of magma, and that is approximately at a depth of 8 kilometers. That's what most scientists are saying. Here they said, to be sure, between 8 and 22 kilometers underneath Campi Flegrei. And that is also already noticeable on the surface, densely populated area, because it doesn't look like a volcano. We see Vesuvius tower over Naples, a stratovolcano, like a mountain. Yeah, that looks threatening. But these craters, you only see when you look at the satellite picture, at the aerial pictures, that there is something going on. Down there, they thought it's just beautiful, fertile hillside. Fertile because of the volcanic previous eruptions, right? So on the surface, it's noticeable through 3 phenomena. There's lots of pressure being generated by the magma rising to the top. So the ground of the caldera area is rising, with the largest increase where Pozzuoli is, where over 80,000 people live. Then we have the massive earthquake swarms that are basically continuous right now at shallow depth. So they're really felt by the people. It's rattling them in the middle of the night. They're running on the streets. They're so scared that their buildings might collapse over them. Gas escapes all over the caldera in these so-called fumaroles. The residents can smell the gas. A lot of gas has been detected in basements of buildings and schools and stuff like this. The best known and most active fumarole is located in the Solfatara crater, this white sandy area. That's how it looks. And that's not far from the city of Pozzuoli. They're building right around, if you look at the aerial picture, it's crazy. Or if you look at that video here, people standing on their balcony, they're looking at the steam, they're looking at the fumaroles, and crazy enough, they're planning to build a large hotel right there. It's a tourist attraction, but if you're there when something happens, it's going to be devastating. We've had phases of unrest in the 1950s, 70s, and 80s. And then after a prolonged period of inactivity and some ground subsidence, a new phase of activity began in 2005. So this has been lasting for over 20 years, guys. And it continues while I'm speaking. And it has been steadily intensifying since around 2023, when the intensity of the swarms, the magnitudes went up, and the land rise. And the experts at this congress, at this volcanology congress in Geneva, believe even stronger earthquakes are possible. This was highlighted, and that's a problem because the buildings in Naples, Pozzuoli, they're not ready for that. So many buildings will collapse. It's a disaster. So the current phase differs from the past periods of unrest in several aspects. It's reflected on the one hand in this exceptionally long duration of this bradyseismic crisis. And on the other hand, new record values are being set in all relevant measurement areas, not only just earthquakes or just gas or just land rise. All of it. That pressure cooker is building up pressure. We see the number of earthquakes constantly increasing. We just had another swarm. We still see earthquakes every day. They're in the higher ranges. Major quake, we had June 30th with a magnitude of 4.6. That was concerning. And as I just mentioned, was the strongest since records began. And the scientists at this Congress agree on one thing. This is unlikely to be the end of the story. And you know what that means. They say, quote, "We will have to expect a further increase in earthquake activity and possibly even higher magnitudes." So we had 4.6. Structural engineers in Naples say a 5, and we have catastrophe, and they say, and this is not fear-mongering, they say we will have hundreds of thousands of people over and out. Land rise has reached new record levels. They discussed this at the conference, especially in recent months. Uplift rate is the highest in Pozzuoli, center of the caldera. The ports are running dry because the land is rising, pushing the water away. Boats, ferries have problems. In the area where we have the fumaroles, temperature measured just below the surface is also increasing where they come out, and particularly in the Solfatara crater that is kind of sealed. That's the lid, it seems, of a potential eruption. And of course, on this meeting, there's many volcanologists from the INGV, and one of them, Roberto Isaiah, has explained in a presentation the so-called magnetotelluric measurements that they conducted. I've reported about this in a separate video. They prove that deep faults in the rock exist beneath the fumaroles. What does that mean? Faults, it's cracked area. So today, they serve as ascent pathways for magmatic fluids, gases, and liquids. And this indicates that eruptions occurred there in earlier times. So there is a plumbing system for magma to come to the surface. And they're telling us, they're discussing this, eruptive magma rises upwards. That's a fact. It's undisputed that something extraordinary is happening at Campi Flegrei. And that is so scary enough, right? So still, the big question is, what is responsible for this activity and what will be the ultimate outcome? Well, we kind of have an idea. Several scientists have developed a physically sound future scenario. They assume that all episodes of unrest since the 1950s have been caused by the formation of a new magma chamber at a depth of only 3 to 4 kilometers. They have that confirmed now in multiple studies. So they say, quote, "Our calculations suggest that potentially eruptive magma is now present there." Yes, they say it's already in an eruptive state, chemically. The chemical composition, that means little to no warning time in the worst case scenario. And the volcanologists are saying that we know that now. This is a crucial finding. And you see that graphic here. You see all the gray dots. That's the epicenter of these earthquakes. That's the hydrothermal system with the water, with the fluids. And then you see the dark red. That's the deeper lying big magma chamber. And then you see the yellow thing, the mushroom rising up. That's the more shallow magma chamber that they discovered. Of course, compared to the big one, the current data suggests that the new magma reservoir is still relatively small, big enough to cause harm, but combined with other factors. But they think that the size of this magma chamber, and we're talking about a magmatic eruption right now, in the very short time, they think it's rather unlikely that an internally triggered volcanic eruption is unlikely. In other words, the pressure at depth is probably not sufficient for the magma to reach the surface on its own. Aha! Does that sound good? So nothing to worry here? Or not? Well, let's hear what they further say. Because they're saying, no, you felt relieved maybe, but don't be. Because they're saying, but it's not far off. They say, quote, At the current magma injection rate, several more decades would be needed for the necessary overpressure to build up for magma. But the Earth's crust is so weakened that we see the cracks appear, and an eruption at Campi Flegrei is still possible, even likely, even in a shorter time frame. So how is that? Well, magma cannot rise on its own because it doesn't have enough pressure. But if your caprock layer is so weak, it doesn't need so much pressure, right? This is due to that fact that the Earth's crust beneath the surface, or let's say between the surface and the magma reservoir at the depth of 3 to 4 kilometers, has been severely affected and damaged by the unrest that has now lasted for 75 years. So when the unrest in the 1980s happened, since then, studies confirm that caprock layer has only a third of its strength left to keep the lid on. So we have large quantities of hydrothermal fluids, mostly water, circulating around in this cracked and weakened area, soaking the rocks. And of course, the water is getting hot. That's why we're seeing fumaroles and stuff like this. So this hot mixture is further rupturing the crust. It's bursting the Earth's crust. This creates the cracks, which manifest themselves, amongst other things, in the form of earthquakes. That's what we're seeing here. The crust is breaking. The lid of the pressure cooker is weakening. And according to these scientists, these cracks pose the greatest danger. Because if magma comes in contact with water, the magma doesn't need to rise to the surface, just needs to touch the water in the hydrothermal system. This would lead to phreatic explosions, hydrothermal explosions, phreatic eruptions, steam explosions, however you want to call this. White Island in New Zealand, this was super bad. Phreatic eruptions, right? So these could in turn, as I said, help the magma to come to the surface. If the magma can't do it on its own, these phreatic eruptions will help. They pave the way for eruptions that also eject magma, and that has happened in the past at Monte Nuovo. So even if these eruptions then are not super eruptions, such eruptions would already have catastrophic, that's what they're saying, catastrophic consequences in this densely populated area. This is probably the most densely populated volcano ever. So that's why they urgently caution everyone. They say the development of these cracks has to be monitored. They say we don't want to create panic. This is not what we want to do when we say that, but it is to determine what monitoring measures need to be taken to best predict an eruption, because they don't know a lot, and they admit that. And they're saying, quote, based on our work, we propose that monitoring the development of fractures that could ultimately connect the magma reservoir to the surface is of utmost importance. And it seems this is not done enough. And now the big question is, because remember, there was a lot of fighting because whoa, you cannot say that this is dangerous, tourists won't come, property values will tank. So now we have that Congress in Geneva. So what will the Italian politicians do? What will the decision makers in the region do? How will they respond to these recommendations? That remains to be seen, because there's a lot at stake and they're getting a lot of pressure from developers, the tourist industry. But again, I think it's starting since the INGV president said what he said, which is alarming in the end screen, guys. I think things might change. We've had a lot of controversies in the past repeatedly flaring up over what measures should be taken to protect the population. The uninevitable, only safe solution would be they need to move away. Nobody can live on the volcano. Although now so many people are warning that this needs to be done. Now they're saying, can we do this carefully? Just if someone moves out, nobody else is allowed to move in anymore. Can we slowly maybe turn Campi Flegrei in a natural park, like a state park or something, should not be inhabited. But that would take a very long time. So if we would see a phreatic eruption from now or in the next few years, nothing would have changed, right? So unfortunately, experts say that it's safe to assume that no drastic measures will be taken for the time being. I'm not so sure because there's a lot of pressure. So many officials are warning now. But if we look at the current INGV bulletin that they release on a weekly basis, and then they have a monthly bulletin about what's going on at Campi Flegrei, they're always saying that sentence monitoring of the Phlegreian field area remains at yellow alert level. Deviations in the monitored parameters that lead to a different development will be communicated promptly. So they thought, can we have different alert levels that we don't have to go from yellow to orange? I mean, they said in 2023, if we see another earthquakes above magnitude 4, we will go to orange. Now we have 4.4, 4.4, 4.6, 4.6. Nothing has happened. Then they thought, how can we invent a dark yellow level and then orange and then dark orange before we go to red? So all that to just avoid raising the alert level. And they still haven't done this to this day, but I will monitor this for you guys. I hope you found this interesting. Check the links, support the channel. Thanks for your comments, thanks for liking, thanks for being here, guys, and I hope I see you the very next second in the end screen videos. Subscribe, guys. Go to my channel page, click on videos, click on recent. There you see everything that is going on. Crazy. And if you want to know how a small phreatic eruption looks, well, look at my last video here. So see you right there. Take care, guys.